the most important part of social policy are free markets. And I can't stress that enough, because also people in Germany tend to forget that. So free markets, competition, an efficient price mechanism that makes sure that you as a consumer get good quality goods and services to a good price, to a price that ideally gets lower over time. So that is the first part of social policy, and that's why we need markets.
After studying public policy at the Willy Brandt School of Public Policy and philosophy and economics at the universities of Bayreuth and Valladolid, Justus Lenz became a well-known member of the Erfurt-based Wilhelm Röpke Institute. He is also a visiting lecturer at the Willy Brandt School of Public Policy at the University of Erfurt. Since 2021, Justus has been the head of the Liberal Institute, the think tank of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, prior to which he was a policy advisor for economic and financial affairs at the Liberal Institute. Based in the Federal Republic of Germany, the Friedrich Naumann Foundation is an organization focused on growing political education and promoting human freedom for the dignity of all people and societies globally. Prior to his work at the Naumann Foundation, Justus was the head of fiscal policy and digital transformation at the German Family Business Association. He is also a contributor to forliberty.eu, a platform collecting the opinions and ideas of Central and Eastern European intellectuals on the liberal environment. His research interests include institutional economics, e-government, and digital transformation.
Welcome, Justus Lenz, to Advocata. I believe this is your first time in Sri Lanka. How has it been?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. I arrived 2 days ago in the morning, and up to now it has been very interesting. I'm very happy to be here. We had a lot of talks, a lot of meetings, and I'm looking forward to our discussion now.
Yes, I believe you're going to be here for a few more days, and I hope you have an opportunity to see a little bit of our country.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have time to see a lot more, but a little bit more, yeah.
So let's start a little bit about yourself. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your story?
Well, I was always interested in how societies work, how economics work, how the relationship between economics and politics is actually working out, and what are the concepts and the theories behind what we see in our world, in everyday life. And so I decided not to study something classical, politics or economics, but I was on the lookout for something that combines the two perspectives, and I found philosophy and economics. And so I studied philosophy and economics with a strong focus on economic policy and policy making. I continued to do a master in public policy.
Afterwards, where was this?
This was in Bayreuth in Germany at the University of Erfurt, and also I studied a little bit abroad in Spain. And afterwards, my first station, well, I stayed a little bit at the university, but then decided to move on into politics and policy making. And I worked for 3 years in the state parliament of Thuringia, one of the federal states in Germany, as a policy advisor for financial and economic policy. Afterwards, I continued to the German Family Business Association. Maybe we can talk about family businesses and their role in Germany and in the market economy a little bit later. There I was an advisor for fiscal policy and also for digital transformation. And then, well, a little bit more than 3 years ago, I changed to the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom. And there first I started as an policy advisor for economic policy, for the social market economy, and 1.5 years I had the opportunity to head our think tank, the Liberal Institute.
So, Eustace, I gather you speak very good English, almost like a first language, and generally Germans speak good English. But you're a country with a long tradition, and you're very proud of your language. But you all have taken a very pragmatic approach about English. What is the debate about language in Germany?
Well, I mean, Germans do try to learn English, and also it is common to also have a second foreign language. So for me, for example, that's Spanish. I had the pleasure to spend a year in the United States during high school. So that was when I really, well, before going, I had the feeling I had to learn English. So before, my English wasn't very good, but then I really started to put in the effort. And of course, once you live for some time, you really learn the language. No, in general, we are very open. Most people try to learn English and another language. Some are lucky and they even learn more. But yeah, we are still very proud of our language. And I mean, there are a lot of efforts also to have with Goethe Institute to try to also have courses, German courses, and try to spread the language as well. There's always the debate in the European Union, of course, what languages is this? Yeah, it's not a federation, it's not a federal state, but something in between. So what language is the European Union using? But more or less English is the common ground, right?
So I think in Sri Lanka also we have the Goethe Institute. And many years ago, I also tried to learn German, but I just couldn't get around the female, the male, the neutrum, the nouns. So I just gave up. Maybe I should have put a greater effort.
No, it is a difficult language. Yeah.
So Eustace, can you tell us about how these political parties have foundations in Germany and what the background to them are? Because the Friedrich Ebert Foundation has been in Sri Lanka for a very, very long time. Unfortunately, due to some incidents that happened some time ago, they left. But what is the background of these institutions, and why do they do work outside Germany?
Yeah, the political foundations are, that's true, something peculiar and very special that I think we only have something like that in Germany. To give you a short answer, after the Second World War, the idea was that you have to try to educate the public about the values of freedom, of democracy, and also of liberty, of a democratic system. And so the idea was that, I mean, how do you do that? And one idea was that you give money to foundations that are independent from their political parties, but that share the same mindset, the same general view of society and politics, and that these foundations do educational work. And that was the start of the foundations. And then I'm not even sure, it was at the end of the 50s, beginning of the 60s, as far as I know. Also, there was the idea that these institutions could also help to foster international relations for Germany, because political foundations can do work on a different level than an official embassy. So you can organize visits like this, you can have people talking to each other, and it is not so formal because we are not diplomats. Our colleagues here are not diplomats, and you can really start a conversation between the different civil sectors. So that's basically, in a nutshell, the idea. And now we have around 60 offices worldwide. So it is quite a big network.
Now, the Friedrich Naumann Foundation represents the foundation of the Liberal Party of Germany. Can you explain to our listeners what is the ideology of the Liberal Party?
Well, we follow, we have a very liberal view on society, on politics, and that is what we share with the Liberal Party. So in a nutshell, it is that the individual being is the starting point, and you might say also the end point of politics. So that's also, by the way, why we call ourselves the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom. So it is always difficult once you have society, and we are also political animals. So we are not isolated, of course, but we are part of the society. But we are not thinking in, the group is more important than the individual. And if you have to take collective action, if you have to make policy decisions, you might say that you have to argue why you take these collective actions. Yeah, so in a way, it's I would say that maybe in other political views or in normative views, it's the other way around, right? So for some people, you would have to argue why you want to stress the freedom of the individual. And for us, it's the other way around.
So in Germany, these libertarian ideas, does it have a lot of traction, or is it a constant fight?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at polls, there is a great openness to liberal ideas. We have to be a bit careful because there is a very small minority of people who would say they are libertarians. But I would say that most of the Germans who would say they are liberal follow more like a classical liberal model. Yeah, I mean, the distinctions are always blurry, but so I would say liberal. Yeah. So it depends on what polls you take, but 20-30% of the population, maybe even 40%, say that they are open to liberal politics and to liberal views. But of course, yeah, that's a general openness. So if you look at the hard numbers, I would say maybe 10-15% of the population are really have a liberal mindset, as complete liberal mindset, or even identify as liberal. And when it comes to policy, sometimes liberal ideas have a lot of traction, but still, as everywhere, we liberals, we have to constantly argue, and there's in politics always it's almost like a natural characteristic of politics that you want to take action. And as liberals, often we have to argue that you don't have to take action. Yeah, and that is always a bit difficult. Yeah, but I think it's the same all over the world.
So if you trace the origins of this libertarian movement, was there much history in Germany, or was it mainly the French philosophers who kind of led the genesis for this, that even the founding fathers of America were influenced by?
No, there's a long tradition also in Germany. Well, when I studied, for example, philosophy, of course, you start, I don't know, with Locke and Hume. But if you look at Kant, I mean, that is, it's very difficult to read. He wrote very complicated, right? Like a lot of German philosophers, to be honest. But basically, when he said that that you have the heaven above you and the stars, and that you have the moral compass inside you, I'm paraphrasing very freely. I mean, that is a very strong liberal view, yeah, that we have to take, that we have to define our moral values and work on them. So there's a long liberal tradition as well, but of course there are also philosophers who are more collective oriented. And maybe if you compare it to the Anglo-Saxon world, I would say that liberal ideas per se were maybe stronger. But there were always also liberal philosophers in Germany, and especially during the 1930s, after the world economic crisis and the First World War. We are going to come to that, I'm sure. There was a strong liberal movement of economists, of people who studied law, who developed the ideas and concepts of the social market economy. So that is also very strong, we say, the ordo-liberal tradition.
And what's your sense of the liberal movement globally? Because as Fareed Zakaria, he wrote an essay, I believe about 20 years ago, The Rise of what they call illiberal democracies, where you have very popular leaders, but who were taking away the libertarian rights of their citizens. We've also seen a significant rise in nationalism. Recently, you probably followed what happened in Brazil. Do you think the libertarian movement globally is under threat?
Now, first of all, I have to be careful that I don't go into too much theory, because the question how you move from an undemocratic society, from small groups, and then where you have a strong man, a strong woman who takes control, monarchies, dictatorships, to an open society. I mean, that's the million-dollar question, and it's very interesting. And unfortunately, there isn't a model that you can follow that is, where success is guaranteed. But there are some successful cases of transition. And in general, but to keep it short, I would say that liberal values and democracies are always under threat. So I always like the quote from Popper, who said, institutions are like fortresses, they have to be manned. And I think that's exactly right. So you have to fight for liberal values, for democratic values every day. And I think there was like this move towards, not all of these countries became autocracies, right? But the rise of populist leaders, maybe. We also had this in Europe, and unfortunately, we still have countries who have populist leaders from the left and from the right. But recently, I would say that we also see, the empirical evidence is clear. On the long run, democracies, open societies with political freedom and with free markets are stronger and more successful, wealthier, and they also provide the best opportunities for their citizens, at least on the long run. And it's easy to forget that, right? But I think that now we have to, there are two events that really stress this point again. First is COVID, of course, where some autocratic countries, especially one big one, first in the beginning seemed to be very successful, because the strong men took one decision. I'm talking about China, of course, and that was a good decision for some time for the country. But then the circumstances changed, and then you also have to change your policy decision. And that's really not a strong suit of autocratic governments. And sometimes in democracies and in open societies, it is tedious because you discuss a lot and then something is decided, but there's criticism. But this also makes open societies and democracies more flexible. Now China opened. They didn't push the vaccine strategy. And I think overall, if we look back on the maybe 3 years of COVID, democracies overall were more successful. And of course, the second example is the Russian attack on Ukraine. It's one decision by, maybe not by one guy, but by one guy and his elite group around him. And they completely failed to see the situation because there was no discussion, there was no input. They thought they would overrun Ukraine within a week. And they completely failed because they couldn't. I'm not sure, of course, I can't see into the heads of of autocrats, but I think that they are unable to even understand that there is a country of people who want to be free and who want to be left alone from aggression and who are willing to fight for that. And I mean, I would say that these two events are not a very good marketing for populist leader and for autocracies. And they should also remind us, sometimes Democrats, we're also fighting in between over policy. And as I said, it can be tedious to argue for your point of view. And as liberals, we sometimes we win, sometimes we lose the argument. But of course, there's a feeling that, it would be nice to, what is right and what should be decided. But I think this reminds us that we have to be strong and that we have to be confident that we are on the right track. Yeah.
So, Justus, our President Ranil Wickremesinghe, in many of his speeches, he has said that Sri Lanka should adopt the social market economic model. When he was a Prime Minister in 2015 also, he said this, and I was part of a group trying to understand what the social market economy was all about. Can you tell us what the German model is?
Yes, of course. To give a small background, as I said, developed first in theory during the 1930s as a response to the economic crisis, First World War, but also, of course, the rise of fascism and socialism. The basic idea was to have a model for the market, but these guys, the ordoliberals, also thought about the connection between markets, politics, and society. So they were not only focused on the market, but the idea, in a nutshell, was to have a model where you could harness the power of free markets, the innovative energy that entrepreneurs carry, the price mechanism that is just the most efficient thing we have to coordinate action, to harness that power, while at the same time making sure that the forces of the market don't destroy themselves. So what they were most concerned with is power and how you can try to make sure that power does not aggregate. In politics, because they saw that, but also in economics and in the economy, which also happened, that you have these big companies that become monopolies and then can hinder competition, and who also become very powerful, of course, in influencing politics. And so a key, where we can use a good analogy, I mean, soccer is the most popular sport in Germany, so we use this analogy to explain the core principle. You have like the playing field, and you have the players. Now, the playing field is the economy, the market, and the players are companies, individual entrepreneurs, people who are in the market and who compete against each other. And the role of the state is to set the rules for the game. So in a way to provide the framework for the market and for the game, and to be the referee. But not, at least in the ideal world, to directly intervene in the game, of course. So the referee shouldn't ever touch the ball, or try to make a goal him or herself. The antitrust laws, so competition laws that try to make sure that the competition stays fair, they are a very important part of defining this framework. And the basic idea is that when you don't do that, there's the imminent threat that the market forces, not in all markets, but in a lot of markets, a winner takes it all logic is part is natural. Yeah, it's a natural characteristic of the market, and we have to make sure. I mean, if it's because of technological advances, that's okay and that's temporary. But if then companies start to try to rig the game in their favor, we have to make sure that that doesn't happen and that the market stays open to competition. Yeah.
Is there sometimes a temptation that when some people don't like the way the game is being, the outcome of the game, they want to change the rules of the game?
Yeah, of course. So this is the ideal model, of course. And in the real world is messy, and it's not dark and white, but there's a lot of different shades of gray, right? So yeah, first of all, there's always, of course, always people try to bend the rules or to lobby for rule changes in their favor. And often these cases are not very clear. Yeah, but there are some examples where I could say, okay, if we do this, that would rig the game, and then that would hinder a free and fair competition. But of course, also there's always the discussion: what do we do when we don't like the results coming out? And well, maybe a good example is environmental politics. So obviously we have problems, climate change, but also have to make sure that we have protected areas where wildlife can grow and be sustained and preserved. And what ordoliberals would say is you have to make the goal is to make sure that the framework for market activity takes these external costs into consideration and makes sure that the players on the field feel the cost and therefore adapt their actions. But that is very complicated and indirect. And so in this field, there's always the urge to try to change outcomes directly. One of the most prominent examples is cars and mobility. And I would always argue that if you tax carbon dioxide emissions and if you give them a fair price, then there's a strong incentive to develop alternative technologies. But there are a lot of voices also in the discussion in Germany and in Europe that say, no, we have to ban classical motors, and we can only allow certain kinds of cars, battery driven, to be sold on the marketplace. And I understand the urge, but still I would argue to incorporate some kind of carbon dioxide pricing into the framework and then let companies and entrepreneurs see what they come up with. Sometimes when I hear people talking like that, I have the feeling, okay, if you know what kind of car is the future, then don't be here talking about it, found a company and bring it to the marketplace, because of course the truth is these people don't really know what the answer is. I don't. Yeah, maybe it's electric cars, but maybe it's sustainable e-fuels. Yeah, maybe it is something else. But I guess what is clear, we have to make sure that there's an alternative. But I would always argue for incorporate it into the price mechanism and then let competition find the best solution and also the cheapest solutions, because we do have a lot of challenges. And that's also why, I mean, we don't want to use the power of markets because we just want to use markets as a principle, but the goal here is to use markets to find the most efficient means to solve problems. And there are a lot of problems and our resources are limited. So I would say there's there's no cause to not use the most efficient way. Yeah?
So, Justus, you have brought up many important topics here, which I would like to explore. Let's talk about creative destruction, Schumpeter. So, the United States has a far more liberal labor market. Hire and fire is the de rigueur. And it is known more recently for a lot of innovation, especially coming out of Silicon Valley. And I do follow business in Germany through Made in Germany on Deutsche Welle. And the debate has been that why doesn't Germany, which was very good on the mechanical engineering side, not have a Silicon Valley? And the threat to your car industry, which is a large industry with electrification. Now, the forces of creative destruction, are they impeded by your economic system, because your companies have, I believe, a management board where there's labor representation? So does the German system have unique challenges to face the onslaught of innovation?
Yes. But let me make one point, a general point, before I answer your question. The general point is that there is not one model how to implement a free market economy in a free society. And the comparison of labor regulation between the US and Germany is a very good example, because it is completely different. But still, I would say at the core, in both societies, you have free markets and the price mechanism and competition working to the advantage of everybody. But there's a lot of room how you build rules and regulations around it, and how to adapt that to your own history and culture. And there, from a normative point of view, there you can't say this is right or this is wrong. Yeah. And so there is also room for, yesterday we had the discussion and then somebody asked me, okay, but what about the Swedish model? Would you say that's a social market economy? And I would say, no, that's not. It is a market economy, but they have their own model. So maybe very generalized way, when you look at the level of regulation, maybe Sweden is here, Germany is here, close by, but a bit less, and the US is here, which of course is a simplification, but just to make that point. And now coming to your question, I'm not so sure if you could say failure of entrepreneurs and company from Germany to develop these strong internet corporations, if that has something to do with our regulation. I guess it plays a role, but I would say on an even deeper level, the German economy is still very innovative. When you look at patents, there are a lot of patents filed and a lot of innovations brought to the market. But the way how entrepreneurship works, and maybe this is more a question of the entrepreneurship culture, is the people think in general very long term, and they have an innovative model of incremental improvements. So you have a motor, and with each generation you make it more efficient, maybe more cost efficient, it needs less fuel, it is built, maybe there's a way to build it with less space. And so each generation you have an improvement. And in this entrepreneurial culture, these rapid transformations, these disruptive innovations, they are just not so much part of the culture. And I think at the core, that's why the big internet companies they came to be in the Silicon Valley. But I mean, electric cars are a very good example, because Tesla pressed ahead, and that was really disruptive. And from an entrepreneurial and from the point of Schumpeter, I mean, that's just very, very good to see how one entrepreneur can change an entire market and industry. But now you can also see that, so 5 or 10 years ago, there was a discussion, okay, what is the future of the German car industry? And now Mercedes, for example, has the first level 3 autonomous driving. That means self-driving, exactly. So that means that you can put on an autopilot in a certain situation. And Tesla already had this function, but it never worked so good that you could get it approved officially by regulators. And so now, after years of working on this, Mercedes is the first company that has the 3rd level self-driving car that is also legally approved, so you can use it. And I think that shows that this really shows the difference. So they worked on this continuously, and then now they are there, and they even, you might say, have overtaken Tesla. But in the beginning, this disruptive force, this idea, I'm going to do everything completely different, that didn't come out of a German car company. No.
So one of the other things that you also touched on is the market mechanism. And the market purists believe that the prices reflect the scarcity value of resources. So recently, we are well aware of the energy crisis in Europe because they were highly reliant on Russian gas, and the prices went up. So the classical market economists would say is let the prices go up, and either it will prompt a response from supply or the demand will compress so that the market goes back into equilibrium. How has this debate played out in Germany? Because what I feel is that the politics didn't allow that purist view to hold up, and the government did intervene in the market. Can you give us some sense of or some color of what happened?
Yes. I would say that this is a point where the different spheres of economy and of society and of politics come together. And it also is one example that even though we have theoretical ideas that I think are the right ones, you also have to be flexible when these ideas meet the real world. The situation was very bad. In winter, a lot of households rely on gas to heat their houses and their flats, and the prices depended also on the individual companies and their contracts. But there were cases where the prices rose 5 times what it was before the price level, and that is a shock that households with lesser incomes can't absorb by themselves. And so even though I would say, yes, you have to let the shock go into the price mechanism and then work it out, so that the market is able to find solutions, at least on the short term, there are no short-term solutions. So I would say that's a very good example where even though it breaks the principle, there's just cause for an intervention.
So the intervention was through the price mechanism or through a government grant?
And this is exactly you summarized the discussion perfectly. Basically, these were the 2 options, and I would have preferred to give direct grants because of a lot of reasons. And in the beginning, there were direct grants, but there are also problems. Also, how distribution problems has to do. Don't want to go into the details with how the bureaucracy works. Also, other concerns, and so now. And I think that was a good policy decisions. Politicians did not decide themselves on a model how to intervene into the price mechanism, but they had a group of experts a lot of economists as well, and they asked them to develop a model. It's very complicated, and it's not the ideal model. I would have preferred direct grants, but the model tries to make sure that the burden for households is lessened, while at the same time there's still an incentive to save and also an incentive to find different solutions. So to oversimplify, 80% of what you used as energy in the last year, for 80% there's a price cap. And for the next 20%, you have to pay the market price. So first of all, that gives you an incentive to at least save the 20%. But also, there's a mechanism that when you use less, you still get the money that they would spend if you use exactly 80%. So if you save a lot, you even get some money back, some additional money. It's not the ideal model, but I think it's okay. And in general, in a situation like that, it is okay for the state to intervene. Also because there again, market society is only sustainable with the support of the population. Changes, of course, and there's in an indirect democracy, you can't have a vote to say we want a different economic system, but of course they are all interconnected. And this interdependency between the different orders of society also means that you have to take into consideration that in a situation like this, you help and you intervene also in order to not erode support for the market economy. But as I said, I still would have preferred the other model, but I understand why this model was chosen, and it is per se it's not a bad model. The ideas are still to give incentives and to try to still let the price mechanism work as good as possible.
So one of the other challenges the market system has is time to time it is subject to market failure. So how do you think about that in Germany? What do you do about market failure?
Well, in Germany, unfortunately, there is a tendency to see market failures everywhere. And often it is not a market failure, but a failure of the framework, of the regulatory framework. So, for example, when you hear Germans talk about the healthcare system, you would hear comments most likely like, this is all market driven, and there's too much economic pressure. And in a certain sense, that may be true, but the healthcare system is completely regulated. Every rule that is given to actors is given by regulation. So it is not a market, a free market at all. I'm not even sure if it is a market. It has some elements, but it is a very highly regulated, state-controlled market. Yeah. And so there's no market failure because you don't have a free market, but there are a lot of failures in the regulatory framework. That happens a lot in the debate. But if there's a real market failure, ideally you try to incorporate external costs into the price mechanism. And often that works. As I said, the problem in Germany, to be honest, is more that society, public debates often sees market failures where there are no market failures, but other failures.
So Justus, if I can move the conversation to the social part of the social market economy, how does the social part work?
That is a very important part, and also a part that is often misunderstood in other countries. So first of all, the founding fathers, the ordoliberal idea giver, said and also the politicians who implemented this after the Second World War, this economic order, said that the most important part of social policy are free markets. And I can't stress that enough, because also people in Germany tend to forget that. So free markets, competition, efficient price mechanism that makes sure that you as a consumer get good quality goods and services to a good price, to a price that ideally gets lower over time. So that is the first part of social policy, and that's why we need markets. But of course, every game also has losers. And now it gets philosophical. We all have different gifts from nature. There are a lot of differences, different reasons, bad luck. So it is a good idea also to help people who are in need. And in a way that can also help markets functioning, because if you have a safety net, even people who are risk averse can take greater risk because they know they don't fall into nothing. So there's even this argument to be made for at least a basic social net. So first part of the social policy of the social market economy are free markets. But then also the founding fathers already had the idea that you have to have additional social security policies. And the advice was to do that after the game. So not to intervene directly into the market, but to let the market play out. Then you have taxes, you have social security payments, and you take that money after profits were made, after incomes were made, and you take a certain portion and use that for social security. And again, there's not the one answer, I don't know, use 20% of GDP for social security, or 15 or 30. There are a lot of ways to do that, and countries choose different levels of social security spending. When you look at Germany in the beginning, the ratio of social security expenditure was fairly low, and it rose over time as society grew richer and wealthier. So you don't have to start when you implement the social market economy model, or when you look at it and try to adapt certain elements, you don't have to adapt the social security system we have now. I even wouldn't recommend it, but you can adapt, you can implement the basic safety net, and then when society grows wealthier, then you have a discussion automatically on how to spend that wealth.
So the elements of the social spending is that there's a national pension and unemployment benefit. So how does it work?
Yeah, there are several elements. It is very complicated when you go into the details, but and also in general, in my opinion, we spend too much on social security, especially because it is an easy point in political debates, but we are now at the point where often measures are not really helping people in need, but where you take money from the middle class and then you give it into a distribution mechanism, and the money goes back to the middle class, using certain characteristics of who gets what. I think that's not a good idea. But that's where we are now in our discussion. But the basic safety net has healthcare, universal healthcare. It has unemployment benefits, a pension system. And this is not directly social security, but it is important. We also have free public education that is very good. And maybe we can talk a bit about that. The question is, could you even improve that by introducing more competitive elements? But in general, when I look at the debate in the US, Germans are often very shocked when we hear how high student loans are. And there's an argument to be made for that. There's no absolute normative perfect answer, but I would even say that that is an element, if you want to, of social security, because it makes it easier for people to get the best education to their abilities.
So the German system for education and healthcare, is it provisioned by the government and paid by the government, or there are private providers in which the government pays the private provider?
The education system is an easier case. There, most of the education institutions are public. There are some private institutions, also some private schools, which also get public funding. But overall, I think around 90, depends on the federal states, but around 90% more or less of the schools are public. And as I said, they are very good public schools. They are, and this is organized on the state level, so every system in every state is a bit different. There are some models where, so for example, the federal state of Hamburg implemented a system for kindergartens where parents get money or the right to spend money on kindergartens, and then they can use this voucher to choose any kindergarten they want. And this, I think, could be a good addition for our educational system. I argue
so
for
that has been trialed in Hamburg,
yes,
it?
That is an implementation there.
Okay. And what are the results so far?
Very successful. Very successful. As far, I mean, this comment that I'm going to quote is 5 or 6 years old. But one expert from Hamburg that I know told me that when you talk to the politicians of the leftists, the former Communist Party, even they say, okay, we're not a big fan of vouchers, but it seems to work good. So that works, but that is not widely adapted over the country. But that could be a good addition to bring more competition into the system. And also there are ideas of how you, within this public framework, how you could give schools more autonomy to make their decisions, even though they stay public schools, but that is an ongoing debate. But still, overall, the system is not bad. I want to stress that, even though it is publicly funded and run in most parts.
And what is in the south of Germany, which I believe is strongly Catholic, that even taxes, the federal government, the government collects taxes on behalf of the church or contributions. What is the nexus between the state and the church in Germany? Is it constitutionally separated, or?
It is a mixture. So churches have no say in government policy, no official role, but coming from history, the taxes are a good example. So the church taxes are, when I pay my taxes, the state automatically not only takes the state taxes out of the income, but also the taxes, the percentage for the church.
But you volunteer to pay that, right?
Exactly. I'm not forced to pay it.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can get out of the church, and then you don't have to pay the taxes for the church. There's also this is very complicated and connected to historical events that happened a long time ago, where church lands were confiscated by the state, and they agreed that the state could confiscate land hundreds of years ago, and but the church would get some payment in return. This is still going on, and that's always a discussion if maybe it is now a good time to close that, and to give the church a lump sum to end this. So there's still some connection, and it's not like in France where the separation is very, very, very strongly enforced. But still, we are not in religious government or so. Yeah.
Do they teach religion in school?
Yes, but it's not mandatory. And there are models where where you can also elect philosophy. So when your children go to school in Germany, you are not forced to attend the Catholic or evangelist religious lessons.
So Justus, moving on to one of the strengths of the German economy is the Mittelstand, which are primarily family-owned companies. It's not as developed in other European countries as in Germany. Can you explain to us what the history of the Mittelstand was and why they are so successful and how their success is built into the social market economic model?
You could say that the Mittelstand, the small and medium-sized businesses, it's not entirely correct, because there are also some businesses that are still family run that are now international big companies with tens of thousands of employees. So you could argue that the term family business is even more accurate. But in a way, they are the embodiment of the spirit of the social market economy. So these are entrepreneurs who often either they are engineers or they studied economists, and they learned the engineering part of their business, or the other way around, but they combine both perspectives. Family run, so they are long-term oriented, and most of these businesses, some are also older, but a lot of these businesses were started after the Second World War and grew over time. And they grew in a competitive marketplace within the country, but also connected to the international markets. And of course, that's difficult for entrepreneurs. If you ask entrepreneurs, always there's a tendency to say, yeah, if we can relieve the market pressure a bit, that could be helpful, of course. But these entrepreneurs know that on the long run, they are successful because of the competitive pressure. And even though there are associations, especially associations in certain sectors, that argue in the political debate in Germany for exceptions and for special subsidies and all the stuff you can ask for, there are also family business association, but there are also other players that argue, even though they are facing the competitive pressure, that argue for the system. There was a big debate some years ago about whether we have to have an industrial policy where the state decides maybe we have to invest more on this technology, on that, and then you get a bit of subsidies and stuff like that. And these people were fiercely against it. So there were a lot of entrepreneurs who got into a public fight with the then Minister of Economics, who wrote the strategy and this proposal, who fought him and who said, this is not the way to do it. And when you look at the history, they are right. They grew their businesses and they became successful within this competitive environment. And when you talk to them, they are constantly thinking about where can we improve it's not only about cost cutting, but it's also about improving the products and about getting other ideas and trying to tap into other markets. And that is a success model. We also in Austria and in Switzerland, there's an environment like that. And in northern Italy, a little bit also in France and Spain, but so in a way that's really a middle European thing. And in Germany, they are very strong. Maybe you've heard the term hidden champions.
Yes, I've read the book.
You've read the book. Okay, very good. Yeah, so they are around, it's just an estimation, but they're around 1,000 200, 300 companies, so-called hidden champions, companies that often I don't even know, that interestingly are not only in the big cities, but somewhere you drive around the countryside and then there's a factory. They have 500, 800, 1,000 or more employees, and they produce one or two things, sometimes even just small parts of a machine, but where they have the right idea, the right knowledge in the production process, and they are within the leading companies in that sector.
One of the examples that will be familiar to our audience is the two stationery companies, Faber-Castell and Staedtler. I believe they are from the same small town, and they have been dominating the sector. And when I was a school kid, you'd love to have a pencil sharpener from Staedtler or Faber-Castell because they were so much superior to everything else. So one of the things that I learned on my visit to Germany was that you have a system where the Chamber of Commerce, the linkage between government and business, which is a bit amorphous here, which then leads to institutional capture and state capture, because the lobbies basically start influencing policy. But Germany seems to have like an umbrella organization, and at every state level there are chambers and even international chambers. And it is through that business speaks to government, and government even partially funds it. I haven't seen this system in any other country. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, that's also a peculiar part of system based also in history. Hundreds of years ago, you might say that the medieval guilds are the basis for the system. Well, first of all, when we look at how politics talks to businesses and is influenced by businesses, there are a lot of also independent organizations. So there's not only one voice. So the Chamber of Commerce and the other chamber of producers. These aren't the only two voices. But yes, in fact, one of the ideas for having them is that every company has to be a member. So also automatically every company has a vote in these chamber institutions, and also the right to get represented. So you have, if you are, you might say that you have one neutral voice, neutral in the sense that it has to try to represent all of business interest. But this is not their main function. This is connected. Excuse me, I have to explain this a little bit, but I try to keep it short. This is very much connected to the vocational training system. That's also, the vocational training system in Germany works very well, and a lot of countries are interested in it. But then when you explain the background, for example, in the US, most people become more skeptical when they learn how this is interconnected, because of course they don't want to force companies to be part of a chamber of commerce.
So Justus, climate change is impacting all of us. We have seen record heat in Europe during the summer and the recent rains in California. How are the Germans thinking about the environment, and how are they incorporating it into the social market economic model?
This is one of the biggest debates in Germany. First of all, because most Germans are very environmental conscious, and there's a strong willingness to do something to improve the situation. But as I said earlier before, there's a constant fight between incorporate costs into the framework and use the market mechanism to find the best solutions, and piecemeal engineering, forbid to use this technology, give subsidies for that. And I would argue, and other people argue in the public debate about this, that the issue is too big to spend money on piecemeal solutions, that if we want to have an impact, we do have to use the power of the market and of the pricing mechanism to find the best solutions. So I would always argue to try to put a price on CO2 emissions, for example, and then to let the market find the best solutions.
So the practice of these corrective taxes, we see fuel prices very expensive in Europe and even in Germany. Is that an example of using corrective taxes to kind of influence or to address the issues of externalities?
Partly.
Right.
I mean, the other answer is that the fuel taxes are a very good source of income.
Okay.
Yeah, but partly, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So one of the other topics that I would like to explore is that when I went to Germany and in a few other countries, Germany is very well known for goods exports, lesser known for service exports. And one of the great success stories in the retailing sector is your discounters, Aldi and Lidl. How did that come about? And you find it has been a highly successful export. Can you give us some sense of what led to that success?
They are, these discounters and their model, they are an excellent example of how the free market is the first pillar of any social security system, because they make sure that people get very high quality goods for very, very low prices. Often when they sell stuff, they make just a very, very small profit on the singular product, but because they sell so many, overall it still works. And when I went abroad to study, for example, I was shocked of the prices for food stuff. And that is the impact of these discounters also in normal supermarket chains. They are also forced to offer at least some, they have higher priced products, but because of this competitive pressure, they also offer basic brands which are competitive in pricing and in quality to the goods of the discounters. And that has a huge impact on the budget, especially we all know the lower the income, the higher the percentage households spend on food. And when the prices of foods are reduced by 10, 20, 30%, that has a huge impact, especially on lower incomes, because it raises the percentage of the budget that a lower income household can spend on other things. The idea, or how they how they came to be, how this was developed, was that after the Second World War, there were also the model that you had small stores, also with loose goods. My grandparents actually had a store like that, and you might say, with the rise of supermarkets and then discounters, they finally had to close the stores. So in a way, they were also victims, but they also were forced out of the market because of competitive pressure. They found other jobs, but that is a good example how that worked. And the one entrepreneur that was purely entrepreneurial idea had the idea that instead of having this labor-intensive way you have loose products and you have to stock shelves, you just offer products in boxes in very simple stores, and the focus is not to have the prettiest stores or the stores with most personnel walking around, but just to have good quality for the lowest prices. And especially in the beginning, the stores were basics, but everything with a focus on cost efficiency. And that's why this model also so successful and exported to other countries, because where they did not save money was the quality of the products. And also, in a way, you might argue that buying there is one of the safest ways to buy food, because if there's a scandal, that really affects these big discounter chains. So they have a lot of mechanisms to make sure that the quality stays good.
So Justus, prior to these recent energy price spikes, Germany had low inflation, right? For a
Very
long.
low inflation.
Do you think that these retailers had a big part to play in that?
I wouldn't make that argument, because they also existed before in times where the inflation was higher. So I don't think you can make that connection, or I would be very careful to make the connection. Globalization definitely had an impact. So the import of goods, cost-effective produced goods, but I wouldn't make that connection. Maybe it helped, yeah.
And finally, do you think the social economic model is something that is exportable? Do you think that many other countries should seriously look at it?
I would never suggest that it is exportable as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So that you can take the institutional environment, the rules and regulation that are very specifically interwoven with culture, with history, with a long development, and just take them and put them into another country with a different culture, different background, different problems. I wouldn't dare to say that, and I guess that wouldn't work. But of course, what works is that you look at the model, look at the principles, look at the successes. Also, maybe that's interesting for everybody listening, that when the model was implemented, that was after the Second World War, and Germany was in ruins. And a lot of cities, there were even inner cities that were basically completely destroyed. There was no house standing, literally. And the economic miracle, the so-called economic miracle, was not a miracle, because it was based on good policy decisions. And so what I would say is it is definitely worth looking at this experience, looking at the model. You can also look at other implementations of free market economies, and then see what you can take and how you can adapt and find your own version of a social market economy, of a free market economy. Because one thing is clear, when we look at wealthy countries, some specific exceptions, they are all free societies with free markets. Mm-hmm. And without the power of free pricing and entrepreneurial innovation and free markets, I think it is impossible for a country to develop high level of wealth, with the exception if you have a lot of oil in the ground or gas, of course. Sure. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Justus Lenz, for coming over to Advocata. It was a fascinating conversation, and hope you have a great trip going forward.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.